All right, welcome you guys. Glad to see you here on this Wednesday evening. So we are into week 3 already. This month has really flown by. Um, so let's see, where are we at right now? As far as announcements, not a lot to announce, although I will say that I'm a little bit behind schedule on my grading from where I usually like to be. I did post feedback on the week 3 explorations, so take a look at that because, as always, for the most part, the exploration assignment is just for me to make sure that that we're all on the same page as far as understanding the content before we move into the more complex projects. So I give feedback to correct any kind of misunderstandings I see or to point out details that you may not have mentioned in your own write-up. So take a look at what's there, even if you do get a 100, as is often the case. I have posted feedback for the week 2 Photoshop assignment now, because normally I try to do those on Fridays, but I was out on Friday, so that's where I'm a little behind, and I'm catching up on the week 3 projects. So look for that feedback probably tomorrow, but definitely before the weekend so that you can have my feedback moving into the third part of your project. So, how is everybody doing? Any kind of questions or concerns from you guys?
So I know we usually muted, but I'm just gonna say, I'm doing great, and I really love Photoshop, like working with it. So
Great. And yeah,
yeah, love
absolutely
it.
don't hesitate to turn on your microphone and talk. I just like to keep them muted um, for the
Right.
most part for background noise, but you're always welcome to jump in and comment and ask questions. So, but that's great. And I'm glad you guys are enjoying Photoshop. And it's going well as far as what I've seen from the Photoshop assignments. Everybody's picking up the skills pretty well. And those two parts of the course are going to converge next week when you take your mood board and turn that idea into an actual design. So very good, and this will all be picked up again down the road when you get into the graphic design course with Renee, not Renee, with Jacob. Yeah, Jacob Kaplan, because this is sort of the setting the groundwork for what's coming later. Okay, so we've talked about selecting imagery and pairing imagery with words to tell a story, and we talked about how color can enhance the impression of of your visuals, either through the mood and the energy that it conveys, or by highlighting certain areas, and even the symbolic meaning that color convey. So this week we're going to talk about some additional factors that influence the experience of your audience or your viewer, and that is the selection of typefaces in particular, and the creation of a visual hierarchy. So earlier we talked about using text. You explored using text in Photoshop, but I really didn't get into specifics about how you choose which typeface you use and how you compare different typefaces together, and even how many typefaces you should use in a given time. So that's what we're going to cover tonight. And I had a thought a minute ago, and now it's gone. Let me see. Hopefully it'll come to me as we go. Oh, that's what it was. Typefaces. The word typeface is what we commonly refer to as a font. Those are actually two different words. A typeface is the actual style of the letters. The word font actually refers to the details, like the weight, the boldness, or the color of that typeface. So that so we kind of misuse the term font in our everyday usage, and I think that's come um, from actually from web the the advent of web design and and HTML because the tags always say font color. So we just came to think of those terms as synonymous, but they're really not synonymous. But if you do say font, I usually assume I know what you're talking about, usually referring to typefaces. But I'm going to say typefaces as I'm talking tonight. Earlier in the course, we talked about branding a bit, and the idea that a brand is not just a logo. A brand is the entire identity of this subject, whatever it is, this entity. It includes the logo as the visual representation, but also the personality of the brand and the colors that are associated with it. Like last week, I showed the Starbucks logo and exchanged the colors with Dunkin' Donuts, and you see how that kind of really throws off our expectation of what we're looking at. So that's integral to the brand as well. And along with that is a typeface. So brands have their own established typefaces that they use consistently because that becomes a part of our expectation of what, when we see that, we recognize that style, that typeface as belonging to that iconic brand. For example, this is an ad for Burger King, of course, and you see they're using this very bold serif font typeface. I don't know exactly what typeface that is, but it's used pretty consistently in this advertising design. But it's also on their packaging. It's also on their websites. It's, if you go to the actual restaurants, same typeface. It's consistent, and so that becomes recognizable. It becomes part of the personality. So when we're talking about typefaces tonight, that's what I'm getting at, is that when you're working with a subject, whether it's your personal brand or whether it's a client, or if you're working at CNN or wherever, if you're creating text, they're going to have a specific style established that you stick to. But there are certain rules that help guide how you choose which typeface you use. You really want to put some thought into it, just like you put thought into picking the colors that you're going to use because they have certain connotations and they pair together in different ways to create a different look and feel. Same applies for typefaces. For our purposes tonight, I'm going to talk about two different typefaces, and actually this applies to your projects as well. And those are going to be the heading text and the body text. Notice this is actually taken directly from our course catalog. And if you look at this, you'll notice that the headings are done in a serif font. So when I talk about serifs, I haven't actually introduced that yet. I realize serifs are those little extensions on the corners that you see on some typefaces. So you have serif fonts, typefaces, see I'm mixing them up myself, and sans serif, or sans, that should be sans, meaning without. Those are the two basic categorizations. Sans serif is seen as usually more modern, whereas those with serifs are more traditional, maybe a little old-fashioned. Think about Times New Roman and so forth. And so the idea, and we'll get to this more in a minute, is that you want those two to be distinct from each other. And so that your viewer can look at this and see clear delineations between the headings and the body, so they can see where each new topic clearly starts and how it's divided. It makes it more readable, makes it more easily scannable for information. When you're picking a typeface to use for the body text, the most important thing is that it be readable, and it should be easily and clearly readable. So a basic serif or sans serif typeface is best. The more common, the better. Things like Times New Roman, Arial, Calibri seems to be pretty common now. Helvetica, some of the classic ones you think of. It doesn't have to be super unique and stylized, because then you start losing readability, and that's these two at the bottom. They become more and more difficult to read. And yeah, I can sit here and interpret this. Well, I don't really know what the lorem ipsum text is saying, but if this was actually English, I could probably make it out, but it's not as easy on the eyes as you'd really want. There's a debate, believe it or not, between which is better, sans serif or serif. Um, and ultimately, there isn't any conclusive answer. Um, some say that the serif fonts are more easily readable or more clearly readable, but there's really not a consensus there. So either of these would work. It just depends on what impression you're looking for. So again, the sans serif is a little more clean and modern. This one, and serif is more traditional. The other factor besides readability for body text is shareability. And that means being able to share your media across different platforms and have it stay consistent. If you've ever opened a document and got a warning that a typeface is used that you don't have, you'll know what I'm talking about, because it will change the way it's displayed. Uh, and so using these more common typefaces will help avoid that, especially with your body type, because your body type is going to be really dense blocks of text. And if that formatting gets thrown off, then it can be chaos and you might lose your message. So the ones that I have listed here, these are all familiar, are really the ones you should choose from. You can get into something more unique, but then you're risking the possibility that your viewers won't have it. Also, if you are using content on the web, you're really limited in terms of the typefaces you can use, because there's only a few that are supported on the web, because the goal is to make it universal. Anybody can look at a web page and see the same thing. Whereas if you're using some obscure typeface, it's going to be really unlikely that everybody has it installed on their computer. With the headers, you have a little bit more flexibility, at least in your printed media or specific documents. Not so much in web-based media, but in other media formats, you have more flexibility and you can be a little more creative. The main rule now is that you just have to differentiate your headers from your text, your body text, or headings. It should say headings. So the simple rule there is, if you're using sans serif for your body, then use a serif typeface for your headings. That is a quick and easy way to differentiate the two. And vice versa. If you're using serif, like Times New Roman, then using a sans serif like Arial would immediately differentiate the two. There are also cases where a typeface has specifically different versions that allow you to pair it together. This is, I think, is Helvetica New, and it has Helvetica New Standard and Helvetica New Bold, and so you can easily differentiate the headings from the body while maintaining a consistent style. So that works as well. For the most part, though, and that goes back to the full cell example I used earlier too, sans serif and serif typefaces pair really well together. And just going back a bit, and it takes some experimentation. Um, that's a basic rule, but it doesn't cover all the possible combinations, and some of these just won't look good together. Um, but keep that rule in mind and do some tests. Open up a Word document and pair some headings with some body text, and you can use the standard lorem ipsum text to try that out until you find something that really just meshes and looks harmonious together. And at this point, I'm going to cautiously say that for headings, you can use more stylized typefaces. But again, use caution. If it matches the theme you're going for, say if you have this typeface, reminds me of the Mellow Mushroom Pizza place. It has sort of that 1960s hippie theme to it, and so that would work for their theme. Or if it's electronic gaming or something along those lines, then this pixelated font. Just as examples, whatever theme you're working with, but stay away from typefaces that are so distorted that you can't read them easily. It's ease of reading. You should be able to see it at a glance. And I'm doing a whole lot of talking, and I know we're on a little bit of a time crunch, so I'm trying to get through it. But are there any questions? Okay, yeah, a lot of this was covered in the video as well for the Lens lessons. This is an example, the website we saw last week, and just an example. If you're working on the web, then odds are your headings in the sense of the HTML tag headings are going to be the same typeface as your body, but you can add in more stylized headers using graphics. So text directly embedded in a graphic like you see here. A third type of text, and so we've talked about headings and body. A third type is display text, and that is really stylized typefaces that are specifically created often for a brand. Think about iconic text like the Disney typeface or the Coca-Cola typeface are probably the most recognizable, but all these are examples. This is where you can really get creative, really get artistic with your typefaces. So you can go to dafont.com and go crazy with some of the interesting typefaces they have, or create your own if you know how to go about that. And really create something that's distinctive and something that's unique to your brand identity. And you're welcome to do this with your projects if you choose to, but it's not required. And again, I would say only do this if you really have a good reason to, is to choose a typeface for a display text. So it's something you can add to your mood board if you want to. But from a branding standpoint, this is pretty useful and pretty powerful, because who doesn't recognize the Coca-Cola typeface or Disney or even the Harry Potter typeface? If you see that, even if it doesn't say Harry Potter, you immediately think of Hogwarts, and it carries that brand recognition with it. So if you can establish that as part of your identity, then it is really powerful. And okay, I just asked if there are any questions, but again, jump in or type on the chat if you do have anything. really quickly, and this should be some stuff that wasn't entirely in the Linda lesson, so I'm not being too redundant, but some do's and don'ts, just as far as using typefaces. Don't choose form over function, so this goes back to that idea of readability. You want to find a happy medium of establishing a style, but keeping your message clear, because whatever medium you're working with, the purpose is to convey a message. And if you're not communicating that message clearly, then you're defeating the purpose of your media from the start. So these two examples, they're using that stylized typeface on the right as sort of a counter example where this menu would be very difficult to read, especially if you have anyone with any kind of visual impairments that makes it, even more difficult. So always err on the side of function over form. Don't use too many typefaces. 2 is enough in most cases. Oftentimes 1 is enough, but 2 is really as much as you would generally need. I would say only go over 2 if you have a specific artistic reason for doing it. Sometimes you see designs that are just intended to be a mashup of typefaces for artistic purpose, and that's fine if that's your purpose and if you can pull it off effectively. But otherwise, 2, no more than 2. And probably the issue I see the most often is the lack of contrast between the typeface and the background. The most effective and what you'd always go for is dark text over light background. There's actually some evidence that using a darker gray text on a white background is more desirable, and it helps actually anyone suffering from dyslexia actually to differentiate the words more so than the stark black on white. But the dark text on a white background is ideal. White or light colored text over a dark background isn't terrible, but not as ideal. You can go with that if you have a good reason to, but avoid really low color contrasts that start getting difficult to see, or really crazy contrasts where it's just very jarring on the eyes, like you see in the lower left. Where this becomes problematic is when you have an image in the background, and this will be the case with your Photoshop projects, because then you have a lot of variety in the colors that are back there behind your text. So really pay attention to that. Remember your complementary colors, because that'll help you out in building that contrast, and you'll know what will show really well. Sometimes you can change up the color of your text as it goes along to ensure that it remains visible. But again, you don't want it to be too much of a jumble of colors, or using some kind of alternate background to put behind the text, like a text bubble or a box, can help in that regard. But pay really close attention to this, especially in your Photoshop projects, because it will undermine your work if you can't read the text that you're putting on the screen. And Devin made the point of bright backgrounds that drown out the text, especially on a projector. Yeah, projectors are another story altogether, aren't they? Things that you might think will work fine on your screen, suddenly you put it up on the projector and it's unreadable. So if it's ever possible to test that in advance, which I know for your Friday Blend activities, that can be tough to get the time to do that. But there are certainly things you can keep in mind. Just kind of really consider how that's going to display. Make sure it's not. Think about both the color contrast as well as value contrast. And I don't really talk about. I need to talk about value more in this class, but value is the relative lightness and darkness. So sometimes things can be different colors but the same value. And so when you put it up on a projector, suddenly they blend when they didn't blend before. So make sure that the relative lightness and darkness is contrasted as well. This is another thing that I often see, especially with, in more, I would say, almost at amateur media creations like you see on the internet. But take a look at this and think about how would you read this message. Actually, go ahead and try reading this message and see how it works for you from your natural, intuitive way of reading. Yeah, and Rebecca says read the whole left side first. It didn't make any sense. The way they've written this is just something I stumbled across on the internet, but it was such a perfect example. The way they've written this is that it reads completely left to right, which is how we would typically read, but because it's divided, the color blocks are divided, it gives us a cue that these are separate blocks of text. So they've got two competing tendencies going on. It really throws us off. It should read, this white fox has been given the name due to its coat, which is white predominantly in the winter season. Once spring or summer gets in, this coat tends to become slightly thinner and starts to become brown and black. If that was going to be the case, though, they really should have just had it run consistently or have one piece here and one piece there. So think about associations and how your readers are going to read your text, because this will really become a stumbling block for your message. And there were a couple of cases of this in the exploration. This is one that I saw come up. And it's not as bad here because at least the associations are grouped properly. The blue text all goes together, the red text goes together. But if you take that color away, it becomes less obvious. So this is an odd example. This is done on purpose, but it's not a design that I would tend to encourage, because you're not reading Capture the Stars, the and flag stripes. Another example of that, this is actually one here local in town, for an art event that's coming up tomorrow, that it caught my eye because I was thinking of this idea. It's the title of the event is Dia de los Muertos Monster Factory, and it's a Halloween art show that's opening tomorrow night. But the way this is arranged, it intuitively would read Dia de los Muertos Factory, which is not really what is intended. So just as some examples, always consider how we naturally read our language. With the English language, it's left to right, top to bottom. And if you can make use of that, then always try to follow that tendency. So just as examples, if you could picture this as being, say, a magazine title or a website title, that should read Ready for Liftoff. If you're starting off with a right alignment, then you're breaking from our natural reading tendency. Or if you're going bottom to top, then again, it's deviating from our natural tendency. So always follow that intuitive way of reading. Don't make it difficult for your reader. Try to accommodate their natural tendencies. And just for the sake of just attractiveness, avoid these kind of hokey text effects that are available in Microsoft Word and to even in Photoshop to an extent with the text distort. Um, yeah, so 2000, or in my world, it would go back to like mid 90s. Animated GIFs on GeoCities websites. Yeah, stay away from this because it's almost always a surefire sign of an inexperienced designer to leverage these things, unless you can do something cool like the It's Superman title, which was one of your exploration choices from today. Um, then if you're a graphic designer that can really use this to good effect, like they've done here, then go for it. Um, but otherwise, really, just stay away from that. Of course, I recognize that you guys, for the most part, are learning, in the process of learning how to use these things. You want to experiment with the options that are available. So, you can try some of these things out and learn how to make use of them in effective ways, but just keep it very, very limited. Use them very sparingly. Any more thoughts on selection of typefaces and do's and don'ts? Anything that comes to mind that I may have left out as far as things not to do? Okay, so that's my overview of kind of the guidelines for selecting typefaces and using typefaces. So as you're moving into your next installment of your mood board, start thinking about the personality that you want to convey in your personal brand and the design that you're creating, the mood, the style and themes. Um, and then pick typefaces that reflect that. And you can go out to websites like defont.com or 1001fonts.com and find some typefaces that you can use to create a more unique style. Again, keeping rules of readability in mind. But just like with your colors, consider your personality and your design themes as you select these typefaces. So the other topic for this week is visual hierarchy. And as I talk about this topic, I really want to make sure that everybody understands what a hierarchy is to begin with, because it's not a commonly used term, I would say. A hierarchy is a classification of things by order of importance. So it's a ranking system. So a common hierarchy that you might be familiar with is that of medieval Europe, with peasants at the bottom of the social hierarchy, and then the knights and the nobles, and then at the top is the royalty, the king and the queen. So it's a very structured and stratified ranking of importance. So if you think of that now as a visual hierarchy, then it is the order of importance based on how things look, how eye-catching they are, what catches your attention first, what's second, what's third. So that's the hierarchy. It's not a single thing. It's everything on this page and how it ranks by order of importance. And we'll often use the term dominance or emphasis to describe this. So the most dominant element will be noticed first. subdominant element or elements come after. So only after that one thing has caught your eye, then you start noticing the details, and then the subordinate small details, the fine print and so forth comes after that. So it's sort of a guided tour. I describe it as sometimes you're planning your viewer's experience. Nothing's left to chance. You want them to enter at a specific point, so this catches their eye, and then they're allowed to see the next thing, and then they're allowed to see the next thing. Here's an example. What catches your eye first when you look at this poster? The mug. No question, right? It's the mug. Why? Because complementary colors, blue and orange. It stands out, just like Action Doctor from last week. They use the contrasting colors to make that thing immediately stand out. So that's your dominant. What's next? The title, perfect blend. Good. Yeah, less color contrast. In fact, it almost blends, but it's large in size, and so uh, is it catches your attention. Also, it's so large and it stretches across the page, so it creates sort of a wall. You can't get to the rest of the details without your eye passing through. A perfect blend, which I assume is the name of this cafe. Um, blends, yes, very good. And then from there, you get into the details. So the smaller details, and these continue to rank. So it would go dominant, subdominant. And then there's sort of Katie Day, the name of the musician, as well as the Piazza logo, and then the smaller text, and then the smaller still text. So it just keeps going down and down and down. We really need to concern ourselves with those first layers, though, the dominant, subdominant, and subordinate. How do you create the visual hierarchy? Well, you do this through a variety of techniques. It can be communicated through color contrast, as we saw here. That's one of the most powerful ways to do it. If you have really strong color contrast, it's going to be noticeable. Size, boldness, the shapes, any kind of deviation from a pattern. So if you have a repeated pattern and then something is a different color or a different shape, it catches our eye because we're hardwired to notice these things. Even if something's turned a different way from the rest of the pattern and so forth, these things will stand out. So these are things that you saw in the exploration with the book titles, the book covers. For example, there's not a lot of variation here, but that subtitle, A Biography of Donald Barthelme, is bolder. It's darker, so it stands out as a darker value. So obviously, whoever's putting this together felt that that was the most important detail, is that subtitle. We might, seeing the title, A Hiding Man, doesn't tell us a lot. Maybe we don't know who this author is if they're not well known, but we might recognize who that subject is. Personally, I don't, but since this is a book about this person, that's what's emphasized. This one I found really striking, and you can see a pretty clear hierarchy, right? Wonderful World is emphasized because it's color contrast, its size. All these factors make it the most noticeable thing than the author. Book titles really lend themselves to this because you have a choice as a publisher. Do you want to emphasize the title or do you want to emphasize the author? If it's a best-selling author, their name carries a lot of weight more than the book title. Whereas if it's a really compelling title or an interesting story, you want to emphasize the title over the author. So that's kind of an example of the kind of decisions you have to make as a designer. Which part of this message is most important? Yeah, Stephanie Myers or Neil Gaiman came to mind. He's in my world a, a bigger deal. Um, but yeah, so some of these iconic writers, Stephen King, um, uh, Elizabeth Gilbert, people who are known, you would want to give the name value more credence. The same goes for brands. If it's Burger King or like a clothing brand that is really popular, you would want to emphasize that. We are looking at book titles, book covers, but everything in this course is neutral as far as the media. Any medium you work with, this will still apply. This is a website design. You see there's still a clear visual hierarchy from the most emphasized down to the less emphasized. Oh, wrong way. And the same rules apply. Color contrast directs your attention to these specific areas. So we see this again and again. We saw it in film as well. Last week, some of the examples like the Schindler's List scene with the girl in the red coat. It's still a visual hierarchy. That's where your attention's going first, and then you notice something else. Filmmakers actually use this technique really in sneaky ways because it's sort of sleight of hand. They want you to look over here and see what's going on in a particular spot. So this website seems busy. I just noticed the comment there. Um, a bit, yeah. And that's something that actually that's the exact thing that you'll be learning once you get down to the web design course, in fact. And just to show the importance of visual hierarchy is to show examples of what happens when there is no visual hierarchy. It is just sort of a free-for-all. And you see there's a bit of a, I mean, there is something of a hierarchy here in the everything is illuminated cover because there's smaller text, but it's just sort of a jumble. It's you don't really have a clear place to look first. And that's what the visual hierarchy provides. It says, look here first and then move on to the next thing. Yeah, this one is very subtle. A novel by is slightly lighter gray, and that's obviously that's just sort of less important text. The title and the author are emphasized. So yes, there is a bit of a hierarchy there, but less obvious. And that's going to play a part in your Photoshop assignment for this week because I want you to establish a clear visual hierarchy, but also in next week's design project when you turn your mood board into an actual working design. I want to see a really clear and distinct visual hierarchy, whether it's your text or your imagery, or other elements that you include. Because I know, like Rebecca included some logos in this past week's Photoshop assignment. So if you do include other elements like that, all of those play a part. And I'm going to back up for a minute. Everything plays a part in a visual hierarchy. It's not just the text, not just the logos, but if you're working with an image, say you have a picture of the Eiffel Tower in your image, you have to decide, do you want them to see the Eiffel Tower first, or do you want them to see the text title first? And then adjust the sizes and the relative colors to reflect that. And I think we are right on time because that is what I had prepared for tonight. Are there any questions? Any other comments? Excellent. Well, thank you guys for joining me tonight and bearing with me through my rambling lectures. But yeah, if any questions come to mind, let me know. But otherwise, I am happy to wish you a good night.